Welcome to Resilience Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Ostrolenk. This show is about building better humans, institutions, and systems. On the show, I'll be interviewing many different experts from across many different fields, including human optimization, health and fitness, team building, mind-body medicine. In the institutional space, we're looking at different institutions and how we can create new ones, new models and maps, including in medicine, in education, in intelligence community, in law enforcement, in the military, especially in the special operations community. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. Let me welcome Dr. Jenny Wade, and she is a developmental psychologist, educator, and consultant who bridges rigorous scholarship with transformation application. She is professor in the integral and transpersonal psychology doctoral programs at the California Institute for Integral Studies, exploring how consciousness evolves across ordinary and non-ordinary states. Her work spans organizational development, leadership, and human potential, advising Fortune 500 and global organizations, as well as designing advanced programs for peace and social intervention. Jesus, let me start again. I'm having a hard time reading today. Sorry.
No problem.
I've actually never had to do that.
I have those days too.
Jeez. I've been doing this since 2008, and I've never had to do that before. It's weird. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Welcome, Dr. Jenny Wade, who is a developmental psychologist, educator, and consultant who bridges rigorous scholarship with transformative application. She is professor in the Integral and Transpersonal Psychology doctoral program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, exploring how consciousness evolves across ordinary and non-ordinary states. Her work spans organizational development, leadership, and human potential, advising Fortune 500 and global organizations, as well as designing advanced programs for peace and social innovation. Dr. Wade is also author of Changes of Mind, Holonomic Theory of Evolution of Consciousness, and Transcendent Sex, When Lovemaking Opens the Veil, among numerous scholarly articles. Jenny, good to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
So, first of all, welcome back. You do some amazing research that, like, in and of itself is amazing, but also stands out as kind of really unique. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you today is your research into various warrior traditions and how in some of these traditions they intentionally induce non-ordinary states for war or warrior purposes. I know that I read a piece you wrote on the Berserkers, for instance, as one example of a group of people who do induce certain states in preparation for war. I'm really curious, like, why that topic? What drives you to the warrior tradition? I understand non-ordinary states because you're a conscious, explorer, but why the warrior traditions in this particular case?
Well, my dad was a warrior. He was a fighter pilot and a test pilot. So I grew up in a military tradition and with a lot of appreciation for that. But I've also always been interested in Norse mythology and Norse culture. So I'm currently writing a book about other aspects of that have nothing to do with this. But in reading about it, I became interested in Berserkers and going berserk, which is a clear altered state. Odin, who is usually considered the head of the Norse pantheon, was the god of poetry, magic, battle, and death. And he was the master of mental powers and the master of altered states. And in the old Norse books, it said that he could shapeshift into all kinds of different animals. He went about in disguise all of the time and was a master of magic. And as someone who was a god of war, he had a warrior cult, and that's where the Berserkers come in. They were warrior shamans dedicated to Odin, and they tried to create the same kinds of conditions that he was alleged to have had. And Odin was able to paralyze his enemies or unparalyze them. He was able to magically dull their weapons in a fight and make them incredibly afraid. He could be impervious to being hurt. And these were characteristics that his berserks cultivated, usually through possession trance, and oftentimes the ritual donning of animal skins, so that in a belief that they could shapeshift during these possession states. And they also cultivated a mental state that I know we'll be talking about through war magic. And war magic is not specific to the Norse. It's seen in virtually all cultures. It involves ritual practices that harness magical, spiritual, and psychological forces to result in the misfortune, disease, destruction, or death of your enemies. And it includes protective methods to counter your opponent's war magic. So you'll be invulnerable to whatever they're trying to do to you. And the berserks really have, and others in the same kind of situation, have demonstrated these extraordinary powers of strength, endurance, invulnerability to certain kinds of wounds, tremendous stamina, and so forth. And we see it adventitiously in people who are suddenly confronted with horrific circumstances. There have been these documented cases of, one was of two sisters. One was 14 years old when one was 16, who managed to lift a 3,000-pound tractor off of their father, and a 72-year-old man who lifted a Jeep off of his son-in-law. Those are documented in the news these days, and with the prevalence of cameras around, I'm sure we're going to be able to see some of those in real time rather than hearing the verified reports from all the parties who were there to witness it. But war magic involves cultivating that state deliberately. And that the state itself is generally called battle trance. And every culture has developed it at one point or another. It's usually, it's so evolutionarily ancient. It was used in hand-to-hand combat, or with short-range projectiles, when people had that to fight their enemies. And we do see it across a lot of cultures. Because most people don't fight in that way anymore, it's harder to get those records. But if you look at the list of Medal of Honor recipients in the United States, or the highest medals awarded in almost any country, you will find witnessed stories of people who demonstrated these same kind of, tremendous, extraordinary powers that people have when they're in this state. In fact, if you can stand it, I've got just a couple I could read to you. They're very short. There's a U.S. Army Staff Sergeant named William F. Leonard, whose platoon in World War II in France had been virtually all destroyed by enemy fire and shelling. There were 8 survivors left. He led them in a charge up a hill through withering automatic fire and managed to kill 2 snipers. After sustaining multiple bullet wounds himself, he went on to destroy a machine gun emplacement and all of its crew. And although later stunned by a bazooka shell, he wiped out a second machine gun nest and captured the roadblock that had been his group's objective. One of the guys that I just can't believe this, he was a Nepalese Gurkha named Lakhiman Gurung in World War II, also held off 200 advancing Japanese troops after his frontline position had been attacked, and all of his other companions had either been wounded or evacuated. When he tried to throw back a Japanese grenade, it exploded in his hand, ripping off his fingers, shattering his arm, and severely wounding his face, torso, and leg on that side. He held the line all by himself for 4 more hours, killing 31 and single-handedly beating back the enemy assault. And these things just, you can find them in the records, and you wonder, how do these people do that? And it's because usually they're in this state where they are able to control so much about their bodies that they don't bleed out, they don't die, they can go on for hours. Eventually they will, if it goes on long enough untreated, but they can accomplish these superhuman feats that we normally don't think anyone can do. And
and there are case studies found in almost every culture over history and time. So it's not unique to the Norse, is what I'm hearing you say.
no, not at all. In fact, going berserk now in common parlance means going crazy, but it used to mean achieving this particular state. And another expression that we have for that in English is running amok. Well, amok it's not a disorganized, crazy frenzy the way people think berserk is. It's another battle trance that was cultivated by South Asian warriors. And they were just as powerful in this way. Let me find it, because I thought we might be talking about this. Let me just check here. Javanese and Balinese troops in particular used amok, but so did other people in Southeast Asia. This is an account from the 16th century, an eyewitness account. This is written by a British soldier who was fighting some Macassars in Asia. And he said, I plunged my lance, he was a lancer, into his stomach. Nevertheless, the Macassar, as if he had no sense of feeling, advanced upon the weapon. So this guy's got a long spear in him, and he's walking forward until he said, I held my weapon fast in his body, but he made incredible efforts to come at me in order to run me through. He would infallibly have done it if the hilt of the blade had not hindered him. I found that my best way was to retreat a little bit, still keeping the lance in his stomach, without ever venturing to repeat my thrust, until at length I was relieved by others of the lancement who laid him dead on the spot. And there are also Moorish, they were called Moros. They were Islamic warriors in the Philippines around the end of the 19th century, so rather late, compared to the Norse, which is about 1,000 years ago. They only used swords, which is true of many of these combatants. And they could not be stopped by 38 caliber bullets, which were 38 caliber revolvers, were the regulation weapon for the U.S. Army and for the militia in the Philippines. So the Army then went to 45s and shotguns. But one of these Juramentado warriors in Zamboango was hit by 7 revolver shots, kept charging, and got close enough to cut the leg off of an American officer. Still had the strength to do that. And then another one who was not involved in the fight, he was plowing his field when he saw some Moros being attacked, and he grabbed his sword and charged the group and kept attacking even after being struck by 11 bullets. He was only stopped when a 3-inch long, 30 to 40 caliber, 220 grain Krag bullet fired at 10 feet hit his spine. And then he still had enough strength to throw his sword at his enemies.
Wow.
So, yeah, this is really superhuman performance, and it is cross-cultural. It's certainly not confined to any particular group.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the warrior traditions can cultivate these states. So before we kind of get into the cultivation of these states, can you make a distinction so the listening audience who might not have studied consciousness understands what you mean by kind of ordinary states of consciousness and then non-ordinary states of consciousness or altered states?
Yeah, sure. What we consider an ordinary state of consciousness is culturally defined, but it usually means whatever the normative kind of consciousness is for the majority of the adult population when they're awake and not intoxicated by anything. An altered state is anything that changes that substantially, usually in terms of the perception of time, the perception of space, and the perception of agency, what the person, what they perceive to be animate. For instance, if you're taking psychedelics, you might see these books behind me or this skull and think that maybe the skull is beginning to talk to you, or the books are melting or waving at you or something like that. That would be ascribing agency to what we normally perceive as an inanimate object. So distortions of the sensory field like that, which we usually call hallucinations, are an altered state. But there are many altered states. Dreaming is an altered state. A daydream is an altered state. Getting drunk, using drugs, but being hypnotized, and cultivating altered states. Meditation is an altered state. So just depending on how far from your culturally normative adult waking state is an altered state of some kind or other.
So, and actually, I want to ask you one more question before we kind of dive into the cultivation of these non-ordinary states for the warrior traditions. What drew you to the Norse? And you're writing a whole book about it, so there must be a draw specifically to them.
Yeah, it's just always been a culture that appealed to me because it was such a warrior culture, and I love their literature too. Not the Norse so much as the Old English, but the languages were much more closely related at the time. So yeah, I'm working on a book now that is about an astronomical basis for Norse religion that actually ties it to other ancient pagan religions. Most religions, I think, used to be based on the stars, but because the Norse tradition was oral until only about 1,000 years ago, they were not writing things down. When they did write things down, they remembered this ancient oral tradition. So their records of their spiritual lore are much more exact and relate to these ancient phenomena before they were lost with writing. And you can still find those symbols in some of the other ancient pagan religions. So that's what I'm working on.
Okay, that's awesome. Do we have a date that'll be available for the general public?
Not yet,
Yeah,
no.
okay. I'll have you back on to discuss at the time. Okay, so that's just one particular tradition that is of interest to you, obviously, and the warrior thing, the warrior tradition within the non-ordinary states fits underneath the Norse interest of yours, your more broad interest in the Norse philosophy and theology and belief system. Talk about the cultivation of altered states or non-ordinary states. What is the preference these days? 'Cause when I was in grad school, altered states, and that was put aside, and then we start non-ordinary states, and I hear both now. Is there a preference in the community?
I don't think so. Alternate states, I mean, altered states has now sort of become alternative states because they don't want them to be pathologized. But non-ordinary is fine. Any of those words are fine to just mean that it's not your ordinary walking around consciousness.
Was it Tart who wrote the book Altered
Yeah.
States back in the Okay, cool. So talk about and we can use Odin, the Norse tradition, as kind of the framework. What are some of the practices, at least in that tradition, that they would do to induce these states to make them super warriors, basically?
Um, they used the same things that many people use to bring these kinds of states about. Usually, some of the ritual cultivation was done preceding a battle when the warriors gathered and would induce these states on their own, and these were cultic practices. What the Norse did in particular was uh, don animal skins, wolf skins or bear skins. In fact, the word berserk uh, is thought to come from two different things related to the cult. Berserk. A sark is a shirt. And so it could relate to putting on the bear skin and engaging in these cultic practices. And there are pictures on artifacts, things that were worn into battle on shields or belt buckles or things like that, of dancing warriors in wearing wolf skins or bear skins. So they look like the animal, but you can see the human feet sticking out and the human hands. And they're clearly dancing, oftentimes dancing with weapons. So it was probably an ecstatic kind of dance with drumming, the way shamans do, to prepare and an aggressive beat. But doing that ahead of time is one thing. People did it immediately before a battle, and today you can still see it if you watch the New Zealand All Blacks when they're going to play a game. They do the haka right before the game starts, and it's designed to be an intimidating dance. It's a dance to intimidate the enemies with how big and strong their opponents are. It's also designed to bring the warriors into perfect unison, moving together in time as they sing and as they do this dance. And religiously, they have to perform the dance perfectly for the sun god, who is the god of war, to grant them victory. So they rehearse a lot of the time, but they do it in front of their enemy to intimidate them and to bring together a group solidarity and group entrainment with their movements. They slap the body, they get the body ready to move, and they get sort of in this group mind. It's a way to cultivate group mind and aggression together in doing this. And it's part of an old human evolutionary defense system that we also see in birds, in primates, and other things. These defensive displays that make the body look bigger, prepare it for action, usually involve percussion and with a strong rhythmic beat to get a group of animals entrained to move together so they seem larger and they seem more intimidating to enemies. And there's usually a singing component that goes along with that as well. So what happened was it was something we evolutionarily were doing that gave us an advantage for survival anyway. And then it began to be cultivated in different ways for the battlefield. And for example, very early on, when we stopped fighting in sort of disorganized groups with individual champions into massed fighting tactics, people began drilling, and troops that drilled performed better on the battlefield than troops that didn't drill. So it's all about, the marching, the singing that people do when they march and stuff to entrain the group. It really does provide a survival advantage.
And so it continues on just under a different name.
That's right. That's right. And people do the same things. Guys in tanks in the Iraq War were cranking up rock music as loud as they could to listen to it before they engaged. It has that same kind of effect of getting you pumped up and getting you ready. And that's why a lot of military music has a particular kind of beat.
That makes sense. Let's go back to they put on the either bear or wolf clothing. Was the thinking that they were embodying the energies of those particular creatures?
Yeah, yes, or that they were being possessed by it, to be possessed by the wolf spirit, which would then confer on the person the swiftness, the aggressiveness, the power of the wolf, and the way a wolf moves or the way a bear does. Odin's familiars were not bears, his familiars were wolves. So besides the berserks, you have Ulfhednir, which are the wolf warriors that wear the wolf coats. And there's some speculation that maybe the wolf coats fought in groups and the berserks fought more independently, but nobody knows. We just know that they were called both both kinds.
Got it. And I would imagine that it's similar in other cultures as well. Whatever the prominent, more aggressive animal might be that has spiritual implications for the group, they might dress up that as well.
Yes, yeah. You're not going to find, people whose totem animal is a chicken or a dung beetle in the warrior cult.
Yeah, right. That's really funny. All right, so there's dancing, there's music. You mentioned plant medicines before, psychedelics as example. Do some of these traditions use plant medicines as cultivating some of these states?
I'm sure that they did. There was an article written a long time ago by somebody who didn't know what they were writing about that claimed that the berserk state was a result of consuming the Amida muscara mushrooms. But in fact, the intoxication that those mushrooms produce, although it may look aggressive in some areas, it also produces vomiting, diarrhea, hot flashes, visual hallucinations, and stuff. It would not render somebody fit for battle. So my thinking is that although some of those warriors may have used it in some of the cult practices, I don't think they used it right before battle because it would have just rendered them useless or unpredictably powered when they were going into a situation that really needed all of their capabilities and very finely honed.
That makes sense. I just imagine an army charging up and throwing up and shit all themselves, running into each other, knocking each other down.
Right.
Probably not the best idea to go into battle with that. All right. How about like mantras or even breathing practices? Do those play any roles? And I could imagine like the breathing practice, you might naturally go into a certain breathing practice because you're singing and moving. Was there intentionality with breath or mantras or both?
I don't know. It's hard to know about the breathing. That's never mentioned anywhere. But and as far as mantra goes, yes, in a way, in these older battle forms where you usually had groups with individual champions fighting each other, they tended to start, and this is again partly to work themselves up and intimidate the enemy with taunting. So they would begin taunting the enemy, calling them names, saying whatever they're going to say. And this could become something that the whole group picked up. They could begin, doing it rhythmically and in unison and yelling. And then they have the war cries, which are not just something we associate maybe with Native American warriors. Everybody had a war cry tradition. And it was, in fact, some musicologists have looked at this. It's a particular interval that sounds kind of bad to the ears. It's not very harmonious, and it's been found all over the world in songs associated with martial pursuits. So it's a sound that's harsh, and it makes the group sound larger. And so they'd start. Well, you can think of a group of chimpanzees or other apes hooting at each other or hooting at an enemy to try to keep them away. And so people do that too. And the Norse in particular, whatever their war cry was, and we don't really know, besides howling like wolves, they were big on howling, would put their shield up in front of their mouth and howl or shout into it. And it made this big reverberation that absolutely frightened attacking troops. There are Roman accounts of, for example, Byzantine masked soldiers being so scared hearing this noise that they would run away from some of these barbarian warriors who practiced that kind of thing. So there's the ritual taunting before you engage, and then the war cry before you actually start physically engaging the enemy.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of this has bled into sports, as an example.
Yes, yeah, we see it because that's the peaceful way of fighting these days. So yeah, you certainly see it in sports. And you see some of the you don't necessarily see the shouting and taunting, but you see the altered state kinds of performance in spiritual performance, martial arts, spiritual performance in, with different groups.
You had mentioned, you giving you some examples, and I really appreciate kind of reading the accounts. Some of these people were put in amazing amounts of pain, yet still proceeded forward. Can you talk a little bit about how some of these altered states or non-ordinary states can, even though you could imagine like that must be painful as F, still they don't proceed forward and do something despite that. And even maybe even failure of organs and whole bodily systems, and yet they're still moving forward doing stuff.
Yeah. Well, one way to just imagine it is, if you think of a time when you've gotten really angry at another person, maybe even a driver, when you're on the freeway and you start shouting in your car and you're amped and, if that person were really right in front of you, you might not even think about the difference in your size or something. You just want to deck them. So a way to begin to get in this state is to get amped up with anger. And if particularly in the heat of battle, when there's so much going on and there's threats from all over, you sort of transcend your sense of normal limitation. And one of the things that the Norse in particular valued, and other champion-based cultures value it, is personal glory. You want to be remembered even if you die. So you want to be remembered as a brave and capable warrior, and the fear of being shamed on the battlefield. So people want to get amped up. They want to do what they need to do. And for many of these cultures, partly what you do is display your fearlessness, because a belief in invulnerability magic is usually a big part of war magic, that if you engage in the rituals or if you do these things, you'll be impervious to being wounded or hurt. And it's not just a matter of luck, it's actually to being struck. And in the Norse tradition, they had an expression that translates as iron would not bite them, meaning that these warriors, once they were in the berserk state, could not be cut with iron blades. And also they said that, they could walk on fire. And of course, we know now people walk on fire. We see it at self-development retreats. But
Right.
getting amped up for this kind of thing and displaying it. The other reason people were called berserks is, the other translation of that word is bare of sark, meaning naked, not having a shirt on. And when Norse warriors in particular were wound up for battle, they would oftentimes, to display the power of their invulnerability magic as well as their bravery, they would go into battle without armor. They'd have their weapons, but no armor. Or if they'd been fighting for a while, they would throw their shield over their shoulder and grasp their sword with two hands and lay into their enemies with that. So they would throw off their normal protections, and which they expected to intimidate the enemy, and it did. And then just go into the fight. And when they did, they, like some of those people I was already referencing, in more recent times, even though they might sustain a wound, the wound would not kill them right away. And I have a couple of stories about that just from the Old Norse records. This is from a Roman talking about warriors in Gaul, said, they despised death to such a degree that they entered the peril of battle without protective armor and with no more than a girdle about their loins. And then this is a poem about the King Hakon of Norway. He was badly outnumbered and had been fighting for a while, when then he went berserk, flung off his war clothes, slipped off his byrnie before he began. He was the gladdest of fighters. Then Britnoth, an Anglo-Saxon leader at the Battle of Malden, was impaled by a spear. He broke the spear shaft off, leaving the point in his body, and then killed the guy who had speared him by sticking him with his spear through his neck, and drove his own spear through another man all the way through his mail coat and into his heart, and then stood there laughing.
Wow. Okay.
And then this one guy, Thorolf, fighting without a shield, so he was in his berserk state, thrown his shield away, slew the man in this battle who bore the Earl's standard, cut down the standard pole, and then after that, he lunged with his halberd at the Earl's breast, driving it right through his mail coat and his body so that it came out at the shoulders. He then lifted him up on his halberd over his head and planted the butt end in the ground. And the Earl died there in the sight of all of his troops. So that was probably the end of that. And Thorolf still wasn't done. He drew his sword and started, killing other people. One guy put his battle axe, through a man's helmet so hard that it was stuck in his skull. And when he reached back, he was trying to pull it out to take another blow. It was so deeply impaled that he whirled the man's body over his head. It wouldn't come out, but he picked the guy up that way. So we have a lot of accounts of what it looked like at different stages with different weapons.
Sticking with the painting real quickly, even outside of the warrior tradition, there are spiritual practices and spiritual traditions, and that people get into a non-ordinary state, altered state, and then intentionally put themselves in situations that for the normal person would be like, oh my God, how can they handle that kind of pain? Can you talk a little bit about what you study and what you learned from those traditions as well?
Yes, well, they're using the same kind of technique. They may use a different method to get into it, but it is that same kind of state or mind control, and people can do it at will. There are a number of people who today we would just call it self-hypnosis, who can create that state for themselves and can have different kinds of surgical procedures without anesthesia, with a dentist or something like that, and can stand to do that. And you also think of the people who do the fire walking. They get into a particular and trained altered state, and there is a reason it's usually done in groups. The group mind that gets formed, those places, there's usually a lot of intense bonding before people do that. And sometimes music and other kinds of, dancing is playing, and then they can walk on coals without it burning them. So it really is largely a matter of mind over matter. But they've also found that relatives or friends who are watching their loved ones do firewalking get into the same state. There was one study where they measured the onlookers as well as the people who were walking in the coals, and found that their brain signatures looked very similar. So it's quite possible to do that. Today, we have technologies to help with that. I mean, something that may seem real mundane, like playing video games or loud music that you can control with earphones in a dentist chair. People who can amp it up or get so involved in their games can tolerate procedures without any anesthesia because they're distracted. They're just somewhere else, not in their body in a way that's experiencing the pain.
Well, what would you say to warriors of today, military or non-military warriors today, who want to look back at our ancestors from various traditions and see what capacities they were able to cultivate, what states they were able to induce, the effects of those states? How might they learn from those things and make them more effective and efficient, what they're attempting to do today, while recognizing the battlefield's a little bit different?
Yeah, the battlefields are certainly different today, particularly because you have unpredictable sort of long range weapons, with projectiles, explosives, and things like that. You're not face to face where you can see things coming at you in time to react. You may have to be real fast, but you don't have to be fast enough to stop a bullet or fast enough to, stop a grenade or, something like that. So the battlefield today is quite different, and people have less control. I think it was probably easier to fight in some ways when you had the kind of control that you have in hand-to-hand combat of the sort that people have dealt with really until, very recently. So, but that a lot of the techniques are the same, and it is to bond with your buddies, as closely as you can. And if you can do things together, whether that's singing marching songs, singing rock music as loud as you can, or having it play in your ears as loud as it can really help boost you into that state. Alternatively, you can cultivate some of these kinds of states because people do. In a lot of religious performance, people cultivate states at the vegetable festival in Southeast Asia and stuff. And you can see people who believe that they are spiritual warriors. They've trained to be spiritual warriors. They actually go and get what amounts to a military commission at the temple before the festival starts. So they volunteered to be guardians of their community. And the priest blesses them, gives them some ritual weapons, gives them a paper commission, and they are then expected to be possessed by the gods and to process through the streets of their village or town in an altered state, showing how powerful the gods are and that they can therefore defeat any demons or evil forces that might be threatening the community. And so after they've gotten their blessing, then they go and have other people pierce their bodies to show that their invulnerability magic is working. So they are pierced with swords, knives, all kinds of blades, hooks. In recent years, people are pierced by weird things like bicycles and umbrellas and lamps, just to show that they can do it. So enormous holes are being poked into different parts of their bodies, but because they're in this state, the bleeding is minimal, nothing like what you would expect normally. And they don't feel much pain. They may wince a little bit, but not like you or I would if somebody put a sword through our cheeks. And the odd thing is, even if they're being pierced, let's say by a bicycle, they don't get an infection. It's really amazing. And some people have replicated this successfully in laboratory conditions, where they have measured the amount of blood. Because the other amazing thing is when you pull the blade out, whatever it might be, healing is much faster than you would expect, and frequently doesn't even leave the kind of scarring you would expect. One Muslim in laboratory conditions pierced his cheeks with a long skewer. And when he pulled the skewer out, one cheek, I don't remember which one, took about 30 seconds to close, and you couldn't see that the wound had been there. The other one took longer, maybe 2 minutes, minute and a half.
Wow.
So these things, they can be cultivated and are. Some of the trance, a lot of it has to do with movement for some of these festivals. And you'll see people going into trance by shaking their head rhythmically in certain ways. It's one way to start to get into the trance, and then to just move rhythmically and very repetitively.
This is so fascinating. Your book will come out eventually. This is awesome. But you've written on this topic. If people are interested in your writing, where can they find it? Or if they're interested in the topic more broadly, what resources might you recommend they look into?
Yes, I've published several things. There's an open access article that I published in the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies. And if you just put the search word berserk in there, it will come up. In fact, actually, I think I have 2 articles there, an earlier one that was more on the Norse and a later one that linked it to some of these modern things that we know about how fast people can heal, even if they're not very trained in this, but they're able to do it. And I think those are probably the easy access pieces published in some other books. And I have there's an anthology that's going to be coming out about extraordinary human capacities, but I'm not sure when the publication date is. Okay. You probably don't want me on for my castration article.
Hold on. All right. I think you tease us with that one. I can't just end it.
I wrote about castration cults and the castrated gods. There were a lot of castrated gods in ancient religions, and there were a number of castration cults that associated with religious activity up to the beginning of the 20th century in Russia, for example, and still going on in India. There's a cult there that's a castration cult. But as far as I know, people don't. Well, some of them were ecstatic dancers and actually cut off their own genitalia in an altered state. They got into such a frenzied dancing state that they were sacrificing to a goddess. This was during the Roman Empire, and well attested by a number of very respectable Roman sources. So that happens, and nobody ever said that a lot of them died. So I assume that they were in such a state that they were also able to have some control over the bleeding and infection.
All right, so we'll make sure we include a link to that article as well.
I'm not sure. Well, actually, it's one of the most downloaded ones I've ever had. It's in the same journal if you want to look up castration or castrated gods in the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies. That article is there, and I didn't know it, but I've apparently become one of the world's experts on castration related to spirituality. And I was in a documentary that was filmed in the UK last year.
It hurts me even thinking about that, but awesome. Known for many things. I like that. Well, Dr. Jenny Wade, thank you so much for walking us through the battle trance and the warrior traditions that utilize and cultivate these various states. Really appreciate your time.
Happy to talk to you always, Michael.